Hello everyone, my name is Adam Lester. This is my presentation on tort law for Module 12. First things first, for what is tort liability, our book, Ethics, defines tort by stating that it is an actionable or civil wrong committed against another person that is independent of contract. Essentially what we see torts being used for is that they are used as a way to file suit against an individual or even a group such as the school itself, the school board, or even state government. There are many different types of tort. Typically speaking, they can be put into two main categories, intentional or unintentional. And obviously, those kind of show the intent behind the actions themselves. For intentional, those can range anything from assault, battery, defamation, false imprisonment, and trespassing. Assault and battery typically get used very frequently together, even though they are separate entities. For unintentional, those are typically going to be tougher to prove, but the biggest thing that we see for that is just negligence. And that's one that's a very big concern in schools, especially when it comes to breach of duty, breach of contract, or even just not providing the correct supervision. From here, we're just going to go through a few different examples of court cases to get some ideas of how tort liability and tort law really fits within our schools, and a couple of things just to be careful of as teachers. The first one that we'll look at is Frame versus Camus. This was actually from an 8th grade student that was in an altercation with a substitute teacher and was filing a suit for battery, of all things. Essentially, what was going on in the class at the time, the substitute was trying to administer a spelling test, and after already kicking out some students, this additional student was continuing to cause problems. So the substitute teacher asked the student to leave. When they would not, the teacher went to them to forcibly remove them. That force involved grabbing them by the arm and trying to remove them from class that way. Unfortunately, when that happened, the student did lose balance and fell as a result. And that was the premise of the case itself. When it came down to it, the court decided that the actions of the sub were justified and it was not made in malice, but it was just a mistake in an effort for the sub to try to maintain order within the classroom. As far as in my school, some things that I would expect to see for reactive measures, I know, and this is going to be the same case for all of these different court cases, one of the first things that would come up is my principal would want to talk to me, or whichever teacher was involved, just to make sure that they were aware of everything, to take notes on that, and to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page moving from there, or even to provide advice as needed. As far as proactive measures, this is something that we talk about continually in my school, just to make sure that what you're doing is something that you would be doing even if a judge was sitting there in your class at all times. It's stuff that you have to be cognizant of that. We always think about how students have their cell phones handy, how they could be taping anything, even though they're not supposed to be. That certainly doesn't stop them. I mean, that would have stopped this case in the first place if students always abided by that. As far as professional ethics, it's really kind of the same idea, just making sure that we are evaluating each instance that we are teaching and just making sure that we're not doing something that we would regret later on. It's very difficult to do sometimes, especially in the heat of the moment, but that's also a very big thing to keep in mind. You do not have to always react to something instinctually. You can take a moment, breathe, and then move forward with your actions as you need to. And that's something that when I read through this case, it seemed like the sub was doing that as much as possible. There's no malice involved with it, and hence why the suit did not actually follow through for that. The second case that we'll look at is Flanagan versus Canton. This is actually from a 5th grade student in a case concerning negligence. Essentially, the PE teacher, after yelling at the kids and lecturing the kids about how they should be behaving in class, sent them to dress out for their next class afterwards. While that was going on, the teacher was visiting with another student. The case didn't actually say if it was a student in the class that had been a bigger issue or if it was somebody else that had come into the gym at some point. So that part I do not know on. But while the teacher was not in the locker room providing supervision to the students, there was an altercation where a student was pushed over and suffered serious injuries as a result, and actually had to have surgery as a result of those injuries. The court ended up stating that the teacher was at fault for this because they were not supervising, especially on a day where the students were already showing that they were having issues with compliance and issues with just being professional learners, we'll call it. In my school, as far as those same three things, reactive measures themselves first, this is something that I know my administration is very particular about for our gym teachers, that they must be in the locker room and they must be providing supervision at all times while students are dressing out or changing. It's a huge, huge thing in our school because we see cases like this all the time. And I guess that fits more with proactive measures. Reactively, it's going to be kind of the same thing as getting the story from everybody, making sure that the student is being cared for after the altercation. But it really comes down to, most of this is just being proactive, and your professional ethics is a big part of that, and ensuring that you're adhering to the supervisional rules that you need to be doing. The third case I will look at is Wallace versus the Bryant School District. This was in high school concerning wrongful imprisonment. And that actually was one that took me a little while to find, but this one I think is a pretty decent example. In this case, a choir director, after already meeting with the parent and the student and administration, was still having problems with a student trying to get them to behave properly in their choir class. As a result, in an effort to try to keep their practices running smoothly, they actually asked the student to go to the music library, which was not in the actual choir room. It was just offset, but it was a separate room, fairly small, but large enough for the student that she could sit in there, do her homework, and not be a disruption towards others. The student's family did sue the school district, saying that this was wrongful imprisonment, that the student was being forced to be in a very confined space and not allowed to actually be in the class. But the court sided with the school district, saying that the student was not forced to be in there. The teacher asked for the student to do it, and the student obliged. So it's very much something that, because the student chose to willingly, it did not be called wrongful imprisonment. Now, if the teacher would have dragged the student in there by the arm and locked the door afterwards, that certainly would have fit. But even in this case, the music library can only be locked from the inside, and there was all that stuff just didn't fit to it. In my school, again, as far as reactive measures for this, one of the first things that would be occurring is just a talk with one of my administrators to make sure that, or just to get an idea of if this does actually fall under wrongful imprisonment, and then from there they'd probably be following up with the parents, or getting back to the parents, because most likely the parents would have called the administrators to be, we'll say, just having a discussion with them. As far as proactive measures, we know that if we are going to have to send a student out of the classroom, we just send them to the office. We don't worry about putting them somewhere else, especially in our building right now. There are different like study rooms and stuff like that we do have access to, but those don't provide any supervision by a teacher either. So we know to send people to the office just to make sure that they are being supervised at all times, that we know where they're at, but also so that they're not getting into this sort of debate of, is this wrongful imprisonment or not. In professional ethics, this kind of, to me at least, this goes back a lot to the supervision idea, and that's honestly, when I was reading through this court case, one thing that kept bothering me a little bit is what would happen if something did happen to the student. And of course, is the choir director checking in on her every once in a while, or is it just, you're in there, you're out of my hair, and that's it for the day? So that's one thing that kind of bothered me with this case, and that's, again, another reason why I don't ever send students to a separate room or something like that unsupervised, because I feel like that's something that would be a case for negligence, potentially, and very unfortunately. The fourth case I will look at, Nodar versus Galbraith. This is actually one that I thought was very interesting because it involved a teacher suing a parent, which seemed very counterintuitive to what most of the cases out there consist of. This was a case that was concerning slander. So essentially what was going on here is that the teacher, Galbraith, was a 10th grade English teacher with a gifted class. So a lot of times with those classes, you'll find that parents are going to be very particular about what their students are learning and a lot more involved with that. But nonetheless, or regardless, the parent took it upon himself to speak at a school board meeting and to say that he felt that his son was not getting the instruction that he deserved. When it came down to it, the court decided that the extent that this discussion reached was malicious. that did actually qualify as slander. And I would like to just kind of give you an idea of a little bit of that. I'm not going to read through the whole transcript that they have, but just the last part of it. He has been harassed since then. He has been abused by her verbally, and his grades have been dropping. My son is being victimized by these two teachers. Now there's a lot of money funded for this program, and for example, my son, we pay for his books that he has to bring to class to read. We pay for his pencils. We pay for his paper, and the only thing he gets is an unqualified teacher. That's all he's got, and that's all the rest of the children in that class have, an unqualified teacher. And that's kind of the tone of the entire thing, and I think it's understandable for parents to be frustrated. And that's something that our administrators deal with all the time. That's kind of tying us into the reactive measures part of this. But it's also on on everybody just to ensure that they are behaving professionally, even in this case by the parent of all people. As far as reactive measures that could have also happened, this is something that I feel like in a board office meeting, yes, they want to allow people to speak, and you don't really want to discourage that discussion with other people. But this is also something I'm kind of surprised they let him continue to speak on. The actual transcript is fairly lengthy. And it is surprising to me that there was no reaction to happen quicker in this case. As far as proactive measures of professional ethics, I think one of the biggest things that would have helped out this situation is just maintaining better communication with parents. It's something that's very tough for us teachers to do. I know in elementary school it happens a lot, and they do a lot of the I hear a lot of different things about like even in-house visits or stuff like that. And with smaller classes, I think that certainly makes sense, and I think it's great to build community with those students and their parents. In high school, that's not as common. Where we have over 100 students, it's very difficult to consider making those phone calls constantly to 100 parents, and it's tough to keep up with that. But this is certainly a case where if that teacher had done that, and tried to build that relationship and that sense of community, it probably wouldn't have gotten to this in the first place. So that's very much both proactive measures and professional ethics, just encouraging that communication, being open with that. I think that would have led to a much different outcome, or maybe not having this case at all. The last case I will look at, Hoyam versus Manhattan Beach City School District. This is one that was kind of unfortunate to read through. Essentially what happened was a 10-year-old student left the school building during the day. And from what I was reading through, I couldn't find the exact how they got out or what teacher was negligent or anything to that extent. But overall, the court did rule that the school was negligent, that they have a requirement to supervise students to ensure that they are in the school building, and that was not met. And this is something that I know my school struggles with. My high school and my district, we do this really weird thing where we actually share classes between my high school and the other high school in town. It's something that I don't feel like is very common in most places, but my school district is so worried about both high schools being exactly equal that we share programs. Regardless, we do have a lot of instances where students are traveling back and forth between the schools. We do offer a bus as part of that, but most of the time, especially for upperclassmen, those students are driving themselves. And this is something that always worries me is how much the school would be negligent in that case if they were to be in an accident. And we had some issues this past year with inclement weather when it was very snowy, that they actually started telling students to not go to their classes at the opposite high school because of the road conditions, and that they were worried that something would happen. And it's you sit there and think that it's for the student's safety, but then you also know that it's for the safety of the school district itself, which is kind of unfortunate that it's set up that way. As far as reactive measures, stuff that would have happened after this, I'm sure that in the case of if this would have happened at my high school, there would have been a lot of trying to figure out who was responsible for that student. Currently, we have seminar at the end of the day, and I'm kind of assuming this was at the end of the day just based off of the transcription of the events for it. But it'd be very much if the student was supposed to be in my classroom or if they had passed to go somewhere else, and just kind of tracking them down from there to try to get a better idea of when exactly they left. And then from there, if whatever teacher was supposed to have them, if they actually connected with the office or tried to get attendants to call home to let them know that the student walked out. In either case, the parents didn't actually know about this until the kid was in the hospital, which is very unfortunate. And, it's certainly something that you don't hope any parent goes through. and it's something that the school was held liable for. As far as proactive measures or anything along those lines, the biggest thing is just keeping track of where students are at all times, and if you notice something, reporting it as needed. And that kind of fits for professional ethics as well. My school talks a lot about our requirements for supervision. It's one of the big issues at the beginning of the year. We always set up during passing time what teachers are supposed to be aware for sure, and then all teachers are supposed to be out in the hall as much as possible between classes as well as before and after school. And this is really just a continuation of that, just having that professional integrity to make sure that you're supervising students at all time, that if somebody walks out of your classroom that you know either where they're going or you follow up in some way, shape, or form, whether that's as silly as it sounds, whether that's sticking your head out and seeing where they're going, having them come back, something more than just losing track of them. Anyway, from there, that's the 5 cases that we wanted to look at. The only other thing I have for you is just the references that I used to be able to figure out this information. All the pictures that I used were common sources, and they had the citations on there as well. Thank you. Have a great day.